All right, so June 14th, we're gonna settle into in a good space pose. Just take a moment to make some adjustments so you feel aligned, you feel conservative with your effort, and you have the chest lifted and spread. And before moving the hands to the heart, just take a moment to tap into the weight of the legs, really inviting the thigh bones to descend, the sitting bones to root down. And then once you have that, joining the hands together in front of the heart. And with the eyes closed, pointing the gaze away from the brain toward the heart. And every time you inhale, just allow your chest to rise. Also imagining expansion across the chest. And as you exhale, just attempting to keep the chest in a lifted and spread space. See if you can remove any extraneous tension from your face, maybe in the skin and the tongue, the jaw. Settling into that witness role. We try to put aside the ego in our practice, especially in a backbending week, which is not about exhibitionism, but about sensing the back body. Just sensing the entire body, sensing the breath, sensing your own kind of feeling tone, how you're arriving to your practice this morning. And on an exhale, keep the chest lifted and lower the chin toward the chest. Bow to your heart. Inhale, lift the head. Release the hands. And let the eyes come open. Welcome. So we're coming into a backbending practice. This practice is considered the most rigorous of the four kind of families of asana that we practice on the monthly cycle. However, it does start to begin to take us into the sense withdrawal that's required for pranayama and meditation. So it's said that asana is done with the eyes being the primary sense organ. As we get into backbends, we're starting to withdraw from the sense of the eyes because we can't see our back bodies, we have to sense it. So this practice of backbending is really considered the precursor to the restorative week and to the ultimate goal of meditation, which is to quiet the mind. So we're going to do a series of backbends today, sensing the back body. And again, like I said earlier, really not trying to let the ego come into these poses that can feel very expressionistic. We want to kind of humble ourselves and just make sure we're sensing the proper kind of feeling in the pose. So we're going to come into child's pose first, just to get some extension going on the spine. Have most of your props around you today. We'll use a lot of props. And just take a moment to spread the knees really wide, to bring the feet together and to sit as far back as you can. You might be resting your head directly on the floor. You might bring a prop under the head, but do try to keep your arms extended, removing any bend from the elbow joints. And with the arms fully extended, reminding your shoulders to plug back into the torso, not to float in limbo land toward the fingertips. That's when the shoulders get angry. So you might kind of sense that you're pulling or tractioning your hands toward your body to help the shoulders move in toward the torso. And just direct the tip of your tailbone down toward the floor. Try to settle into your hip joints in deep flexion right now. Encourage that deep flexion. Finding not only extension along the spine, but expansion across the back body, feathering the breath out across the back ribs, in between the back ribs. And on an in-breath, you're going to find your way forward and just kind of close the knees in table distance wide, so in line with your hips. Bring the feet back out in line with your knees. We're going to come into Anatasana, which uses gravity to help us take the shoulder blades in toward the chest. And we're going to do a modified arm position because a lot of times shoulders get angry in this one. So extend your left arm and take your right forearm under your forehead. And your hips should remain above your knees. So this isn't child's pose where you're sitting back toward the heels. Keep the one left arm really extended like you had in child's pose. Pressurize the hand, remove any bend from the elbow joint. And every time you exhale, just let the shoulder blades sink toward the chest. Kind of yield to the effect of gravity on your back body. Allow that to open and spread the chest. It's very tempting just to kind of collapse the belly. So bring a little bit of effort to scooping the belly toward the back to give your back more support. And let these next few exhales extend just slightly longer. We're going to gently transition the arms. So you can raise your head enough that you can begin to extend the right arm off the line of the shoulder, fully extended arm. Cross the left forearm so it's a resting point for your forehead. Make sure your hips are still on top of the knees. If you sense you're kind of blasting open the front rib cage, just kind of zip the inner front ribs toward each other and pull them toward the back body. And again, the next three exhales, just do a little bit of elongation, encouraging the out breath to keep flowing out, encouraging the shoulder blades to keep sinking toward the chest. And try to use an in-breath to help yourself out of Anatasana. And we're going to set up Virasana. So this is hero pose. Later in the class today, we're going to check in with our reclining hero pose. But we can't recline the pose until we really open the legs in the initial stage of the pose. So you can set yourself up with some padding under the shins if you like to use that for this pose. And if you are using it, make sure that you have a continuous plane of blanket from your knees all the way to your toenails. The exception being if you have an ankle discomfort in this pose, some people have the blanket stop right where the ankle begins. And some people roll a little additional blanket under the ankle. So these are modifications that you can start to use if you have ankle trouble, or some people get cramping in the feet. You might support under the front ankles and play with that. Anytime you kind of hear of these little modifications, since we're not in a live group, feel free to reach out to me. And if you need, further explanation, because it's really helpful to know how to make your poses customized to your own needs. So just take a moment to adjust the flesh of your legs. You'll roll the calf muscles out and the thighs inward from the outer points in until you see your kneecaps, really all 4 points of the kneecaps looking straight ahead. What we don't want to see is internal knee rotation. This can cause wear and tear on the knees, which of course nobody wants. And then you're going to look at your toes and make sure they are all sitting down evenly and that they're pointing back, not sideways. And then using the soles of your feet for support. Just take the fingertips to the soles of the feet, pressing down, align your shoulders with your hips. Hopefully you found something to support your sitting bones. Most of us don't have the sitting bones magically come down to the floor, at least for some time in this pose. And then just really try to perfect the torso. So again, when we open the chest, there's that tendency to push forward in the abdomen to shorten the lumbar. So make sure you're moving the inner front ribs together. You're taking the pelvic tilt tailbone in, and you're keeping your skull right above your spine, your eyes rooted to the back of the head. Feeling the flesh of the shoulders turning from the inner upper arms towards the outer upper arms. So even though this can be really a high sensation pose, it's one of those poses that's really recommended to do every single day, unless there's a contraindication with a knee tear or something going on in your knees. It's really beneficial to the feet and the legs and the knees. So let's take a few more breaths. It's important when we do this much deep flexion with the knees that we counter it with deep extension. So we're going to come into downward facing dog to relieve the backs of the knees, really get the legs fully extended. So you can start to sit forward and deconstruct your Virasana hero pose and move things aside so that your mat is free and clear for down dog. And when you're ready, you'll come into downward facing dog on an exhalation. Make sure your feet are hip distance. And just put the heels as far from the floor as they go. And this will help us really tap into a very open and spread chest. So with the heels as high as they go, also bend the knees. And then see about taking your chest toward your thighs. It's as if you're becoming a shrinking inverted letter V. Another way to think about this is to imagine you could hold pencils in your hip creases. So you have a very strong forward pelvic tilt. And then once you have your chest toward your thighs, begin to pedal your feet one at a time. And not in a quick way. Sometimes it's helpful to coordinate the descent of the heel with each exhalation. And as you start to play with extending the legs individually, watch that you're not compromising that open and spread chest. You want to really keep that. You can think about your inner knees rotating back and your outer knees compacting inward toward midline. Also imagine or move your attention to the backs of the knees, which you can't see, and sense the backs of the knees yawning open. And then the next time you have both heels lifted, again, take the chest as close as you can to the thighs, and then see about extending both heels toward the floor just for 5 breaths or so. Good. And now begin to come back to your knees. You can cross your ankles and sit down on your bottom. We're going to set up a modified Pariankasana. which we do with Sukhasana legs. So you can come into your left dominant cross-legged position, since we were already in our dominant cross-legged position. And then you have a couple options for the block that's going to support the dorsal spine, which is the area between the shoulder blades. Either the medium height of that horizontal block or the low height. You might not know yet what you need. And then the head block, you'll just fit it underneath your head once you're down so that your chin and forehead are at least level with each other. Forehead can be higher. What we don't want to see is the chin higher. So you'll come back on that first block. I usually use my thumbs to kind of stabilize that block. And I want to really target the dorsal spine between your shoulder blades. So you can think about that right behind the sternum. And then your head, of course, you'll have to find the right position with the block. So I'm using my tallest level. So bring awareness to your back body. Oftentimes in the initial stage of a back bend, the pelvis tilts forward. And as we know, in back bends, we need to adjust the pelvic tilt back. So one of the first things you might do is start to take the tailbone up toward the ceiling, like the letter J kind of moves in that arc. You might feel the flesh of your buttocks moving down away from the trunk. You'll feel naturally the lift and spread of your chest. Take a moment to put your arms in Shavasana setting. So your hands are lower than shoulders. Your palms are face up. Keep tipping your chin toward the chest. Keep encouraging tailbone toward the ceiling. Shoulders grow heavier, chest rises. And then keeping as much of this as you can, start to move the arms in alignment with your ears. And it's those straight, fully extended arms. Remind your shoulders they are part of your torso. This will give them a little bit more stabilization in the joints. And really extend out through the fingertips. And if you are feeling the floor, you have nowhere to go. We never want that in yoga. We always want room to grow. So then you would grab your elbows so that you can continue to open the chest and deepen this back bend. Pay attention to your front ribs. If you feel like they're spreading apart, you want to resist that. Making the front body more compact in our back bend supports exploiting the hypermobile lower back. So hopefully you find a little more ease when you bring some control to that blasting open feeling in the front ribs. About 5 more breaths. We're sensing without being able to see the back body, just really sensing the back body. A lot of times I like to say we can find our way into alignment by feeling our way into alignment. Alignment shows up as ease in the body. And that doesn't mean laxity. That doesn't mean complacency. Two more breaths. I love using gravity to help us open in our poses. Such an elegant way to open. And begin to relieve the arms out of the overhead position. And because you have all this support, you're going to try to maintain some of that. So grip your stomach muscles, use your hands on the floor, and lead with your breastbone to come upright. Good. Okay, we're going to come into Baddha Konasana, the reclining version. So this is a great way to open the groins, the hips, and to keep working with extension of the spine. So we all have different props at home. We're basically going to try to find a prop set up to run with the spine. So if you have a bolster, that's a good one. If you have blankets to work with, you might roll them so they're more round, less flat, because round will allow you to kind of have the shoulders drape on that contour. So you might roll your blanket or your two blankets. And usually a little bit more elevation is needed where the head will be for most of us. And then we're also going to use the strap. So you'll sit in front of that setup, joining your feet. Bada means bound, and the bound part is the feet. Kona is angle, asana pose. So take your tail through your rings and then pass it back through second ring to get that closed loop. And then you'll drop the whole thing over your head and down to your hips. And then tucking the strap under the toes. And make sure it's not the metal or plastic part that's going to bother you. It's just fabric. So it's running from the tops of your feet over the inner ankles, over the inner thighs, around the hips, around the lower back. And then you'll tighten any excess so that you're in your first kind of starting position, your edge, as we call it. Your hips might be really resistant here. In other words, you'll feel your groins tensing or gripping. You'll feel your hips resisting or kind of freezing. So you'll want to prop. So you can prop anywhere from your butt all the way to your knees, filling in that negative space so your legs feel cradled. Some of us don't need that. The legs just naturally flop open and they're happy and they're content. So pull your butt away from the end of your soft prop setup behind you. You don't want to be jammed up against it. We need some space open and clear to the lumbar spine. We want to feel the flesh of the buttocks moving away from the back. And really the soft prop setup should start at your rib cage, not any lower. Make sure the head is in that position where we see the chin is level or lower than the forehead. And then again, you have a Shavasana arm here. So about a 45-degree angle with the arm palms up. And just take a moment to kind of roll the shoulder blades in toward the chest. Roll the arm flesh from kind of the front armpit around to the back armpit. Tilt the chin toward the chest. And again, you might notice the pelvis tilting in the wrong direction. So gently see about tilting the pelvis back, making the tailbone and that letter V kind of arc, not V, sorry, J, arc toward the ceiling. Keep your chin snuggled in toward the chest. Your gaze is lowered, or you could close the eyes. But if you close the eyes and then you start daydreaming, it's better to keep yourself somewhat alert with the eyes slightly open. Bring a little bit of that control to the rib cage, the front ribs. Letting some breath swirl around the upper inner roots of your thighs. And just imagining the journey the breath takes from lower diaphragm to upper diaphragm. So that starts at the pelvic floor, it finishes at the soft palate. So on the exhale, just imagine a little touchdown of pelvic floor. And on the inhale, see if you can journey the breath all the way as high as the soft palate. And if you really want to grow the breath, some people consider the arches of the feet the first diaphragm, the first upward draw of energy. We'll be here another minute. Just be with the breath. We want to free the legs from the bound angle shape. We're going to keep our torso as it is. So you might loosen your belt if you have access to that ring. You might be able to slip your feet out another way. You can just leave the belt over you once the feet are free. You'll walk the feet out to the edges of the mat. Don't be toeing out. That's a kind of a bad habit in our back bend. So toes in front of heels. Let the knees drop in together and then bring your hands onto your belly. Just take a few more moments, sensing the breath, sensing the back body. And as you're ready, start to transition to side lying position so that you can come up to seated for a moment. We're actually going to be moving on to our front side. And I like to put a blanket under my hip points and my pelvis. And if you're going to do so, just make sure it's not super bulky, because that would be kind of distorting the general shape of the pose. Just enough thickness that you won't be uncomfortable with the flash of the bones against the hard floor. If you have carpet that you're working on, you probably don't need this. But you're going to just bring the hip points to the edge of the blanket. You don't really want any blanket on the abdomen. You're just starting at the hips. We're going to be coming into a pose called B.K.S, which is translated as frog pose, which is basically an inverted hero pose, so the one we just did. But we're going to prepare for B.K.S, just getting the thighs a little more open. So you can, at this point, just have your feet hip distance. We'll change that in a little bit. We're going to cross the right forearm so it's a resting point for the forehead. And you'll bend your left knee. And if you cannot reach your foot directly, take a strap and loop it around your foot so you can form a connection with your strap. So right away, we feel the tailbone flying up to the ceiling, which we don't want. We want a posterior pelvic tilt. So working the tip of the tailbone toward the floor. We also might sense a large gapping happening at the left hip flexor. Hopefully, when you engage the pelvic tilt, you feel some of that gap close. You're also going to notice the knee wants to widen beyond the width of the hip. So I want you to just train the knee in so it's consistent with the line of the hip. And be more interested in the thigh extending out through the kneecap rather than tugging your foot towards your butt. So lengthen the front thigh. Keep the pelvic tilt strong. And really try to be effortless in your right leg, your right buttock as well. Now we're going to just transition to do the other side so you can softly release your left foot. Make sure that you align the left leg so it's in the kneecap down, top of the foot down, all 5 toes down position, still as wide as the hip. And now the left forearm will be the resting point for the forehead. And and we'll bend the right leg and make contact with the right foot, either with the strap or directly. So I'm not putting my forehead down because then you wouldn't be able to hear me, but feel free to put your head down. And rather than bringing the heel to the buttock, I want you to actually push the top of the foot into your hand. Or if you're using a strap, extend the foot away from your gripping hand on the strap. And reach out through the kneecap, trying to keep as much of the surface area of the thigh down, closing that gap where the hip flexor is by shifting the pelvis back. And breathing into the stretch. Keep the buttocks soft. Keep lifting up the left inner thigh. Small left toe down. You might even bring a little more pressure there just to encourage that. And now go ahead and softly release the foot. Now, B.K.S, we change things a little bit. We're going to join the knees. Remember though, in hero pose, we are sitting kind of in an inverted hip position, internally rotated hip position, and the legs kind of take on a W shape. So you're not going to be bringing your heel straight on toward the buttock. You're bringing the heel out toward the outer hip, just like you're sitting in hero pose. So it's a different trajectory here. But before we get into the legs, once your knees are joined, leave your legs extended. You're going to cross your right forearm in front of your chest so that your right elbow is under your right shoulder. You're going to extend your left arm so that you're it's like a kickstand. So it's 45 degrees out, your palm is on the floor, the arm is straight. And so we have asymmetry going on in the arms, but we're really attempting to align the shoulders evenly. We're attempting to keep the chest lifted and spread, which is why we're propped up here. Okay, so just take a few moments here, getting the shoulders into alignment. We are going to remove that left hand in a moment to grab the left foot. Also balancing the weight of the hips. And now we're going to start to bend the left leg and reach back for the foot either by way of the strap or directly. Keeping the knees together, start to steer the heel toward the outer left hip. And now with just that one arm holding you up, attempt to keep your shoulders level and your hips level. And imagine you're doing this with both hands one day, someday. Okay, sense the back body, even imagine the flesh of the lumbar, try to iron it out. If there's a lot of crumpled skin, you have to use the pelvic tilt to elongate the lumbar. And now you're going to release and make a little pillow out of both of your arms. Rest the cheek and bend the knees and just float the legs side to side. And now we'll extend the legs and set up for side two. First, just with the legs grounded once the knees are together. So once your knees are together, you know what to do. You're going to rotate the inner thighs up, the outer thighs down so that you're sitting on 10 toes evenly and your kneecaps evenly. We've centered the thighs. Left arm crosses in front of the chest. Left elbow is under the left shoulder. Extend your right arm out 45 degrees, maybe right beyond the tip of the mat. You can feel the imbalance in the upper body, so your work is to equalize that. Pressurize the right hand. Try to bring the chest forward out of the shadows. Tilt the pelvis. Try to soften the buttocks. Bring the small toes down. And now kind of maintaining as much of that alignment as you can, you're going to start to bend your right knee. With your right hand finding connection with the foot. Again, restoring balance to the pose, shifting weight to right hip point, trying to align the shoulder girdle, soften the buttocks. And keeping as much of the surface area of the right thigh down as you can, extending out through the kneecap. Guide your heel toward your outer hip. Good. And now gently release the hold of your right foot. Once the legs are down, again, cross your arms, rest your other cheek, bend your knees, and gently float the legs side to side. Okay. We're going to come into a modified locust pose. So just take a moment to bring the legs back hip distance, to center the legs. Lift the inner thighs up and the outer thighs down. And you're going to bring your hands now back behind you, palms facing the floor. And then lift the wrists as high as the shoulders. And then it's as if you're trying to turn your palms out. So turn your palms out. Keep your toes heavy, especially small toes. And extending fingers back. Notice how you're rising from the floor. Try to align the neck so that it's crease free, it's tension free. Soften your jaw. And keep turning the palms out, which will encourage the arms to rotate the way we want them to. Keep lifting the inner thighs up, softening the buttocks. Good. Now resting, crossing your arms, releasing the low back by windshield wipering the legs once again. Now we're going to prep the legs. We're going to put this together, but now we're going to prep the legs before we put it all together. So you can rest your forehead on your hands so that your nose is free and clear, you can breathe, and that your head is grounded. Again, I'm going to keep mine lifted so you can hear me. The legs are still hip distance. On an exhale, I want you to raise the left leg, but be more interested in lengthening the leg across the floor than how high the leg rises. Exhale, you're going to lower the leg back down. Inhale, raise the right leg as if someone's holding the ankle and pulling. Exhale, place it back down. So each time you lower the leg, it should feel as if the leg just grew a half an inch and you're putting it a little bit lower on the mat. Okay, so you're going to go back and forth several times on each leg. Each time you place the leg, be considerate of the alignment. The next time you have a leg up, you're going to hold it there. And again, just be more interested in the extension of the leg than the kind of the degree of the arc. Okay, don't be so worried about the distance from the floor. And then lower it. And then we'll raise the other leg and hold it. Small toes toward the floor, inner thighs up. Good, and lower it. Okay, so now we're going to put it all together. We're going to take the arms back again. We're going to use the same position of turning the palms out sideways. Try to look at your wrists and bring them to shoulder level. And then on an exhale, lift both legs. Keep the pelvic tilt strong. Shoot forward from the sternum. Keep winding the palms farther out to the side. After an in-breath, exhale to rest. And again, resting a cheek, bending your knees and releasing the lower back by sweeping the legs from side to side. Wonderful. So you're going to bring yourself up. We're going to be preparing for camel pose. So if you have the blanket for those prone positions, you might decide to keep it for camel pose because sometimes we get uncomfortable kneeling in camel pose. If you have a chair or access to a wall nearby, I was hoping we could have a little bit of a reference point of touch for the hips, or else whatever the chair needs. Because when we come into this pose, we tend to cheat by just kind of angling back. The idea is if something goes back, something has to move forward. So what I wanted you to kind of feel with the wall or the chair is that you can keep contact with the front body as you extend back away from that prop. So you might start with it right in front of you. It doesn't have to be touching you right out of the gate here. The idea is as we move back, the hips will move a little more forward, or we want them to. We want to encourage that. If you don't have access to that prop, that's okay. Just kind of be aware that we don't want the hips to float back, because then we're just kind of cheating, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to have you use a strap as well, so we get really nice kind of some support for the hands, because we're not going to be using blocks, which we sometimes do in this pose, but I do want you to feel kind of anchored into your hands and arms. If you have trouble with grip, sometimes with arthritis and stuff, you might make a big loop out of your strap and just kind of hold the wrists within the loop. Otherwise, you can just simply grab the strap. You can wrap your knuckles if it's conservative of your energy. And you want your hands slightly wider than your shoulder girdle. Just a little bit. Okay, so here we go. So if you're using that chair prop or wall prop, you don't have to start touching. Make sure you look back, your knees are under your hips and your ankles align with your knees. Your toes are pointing straight back as they would for Virasana hero pose. Okay. As you back bend, we know that our inner thighs like to roll forward and our butt likes to turn into a nugget. So we don't want that. We want soft butt and inner thighs rotating back, okay? So first, bring your hands toward the floor, pull down, and also pull apart without letting the hands actually move. And come back to that feeling of your palms turning out, turning the flesh of the arms. Already tilting the pelvis toward the posterior pelvic tilt. Finding contact with the chair wall if you're using it. Roll the inner thighs back, lift from the breastbone. You're back in that Parinankasana feeling with the support of the dorsal spine. If the lumbar is angry, that means your pelvic tilt isn't probably strong enough. Keep tipping back, back, back. And eventually in the pose, the head falls back, but not today. We're going to keep, like we have a big starchy collar on. Let your eyes look up. And keep turning the arms. Soft buttocks. Roll the outer shins down, press the small toes down. Roll the inner thighs back, compact the front ribs toward midline. Good. Inhale, sit up. And exhale, if you can, sit down on your heels. Otherwise, do something else to support you. You might lean forward and rest your head on the chair. Anything that will feel down regulating to the nervous system. Anything that will also soothe anything that was fatigued from that. Because we are going to do it again. So in these back bends, it's so enticing to go into this full blast expression of the pose, but then oftentimes it doesn't feel good, and sometimes we get injured. So I really want you to remember the phrase, if I can think of it, do not rob the instinct of the body, which is sensing, for the glory of the pose, okay? So the second time around, sense this pose into perfection. And don't go beyond that. Don't let the ego dictate your pose. Okay, so start with maybe a little bit of air between you and your chair or the wall. Make sure the legs are set up well. If the strap was useful, go back and grab it. If not, you can always do a different version. You might grab your hips. You might extend your arms up. There's lots of ways you can practice the arms here. But really keeping the chest lifted and spread. Already we're in the posterior pelvic tilt. The butt should be soft. Roll the inner thighs back. Press the small toes down. Move back on an exhalation. Lift up through the heart center. Keep your gaze soft. Compact the inner front ribs like there's a zipper there and you're zipping it closed. Relax your jaw. Anchor into the outer shins. Keep turning the hands to face out if you're in the strap version. And on an in-breath, come back up. And then exhale, whatever was the restorative version for you. Kneeling, forehead resting on chair, maybe child's pose. Just do you. If you did use a chair, you can just put it aside now. So I told you that we were going to kind of work toward reclining hero pose, which is now where we're going, except it's actually going to be the version of the pose that we did earlier, which is Paryanukasana, with the blocks supporting the dorsal spine and the head. I personally find this version of reclining hero easier in my body. That may not be true for you, but that's what we're gonna try. So we're gonna have the shins, if that's something you use for your hero pose. If you do not do hero pose or reclining hero pose, feel free to set up your either bound angle legs or your cross-legged Sukhasana legs. You can decide. You're still gonna recline back on 2 blocks. I should say attempt to recline back on 2 blocks. And the attempt is perfect. So it doesn't, if you don't reach the pinnacle pose, all practice is good practice. There's no harm in getting as far as you can get. So make sure sitting bones are supported. You're going to set up your blocks because of the bulk of the legs in hero. Your blocks are kind of probably going to be a one higher setting than they were when we reclined back earlier, because we were lower, closer to the floor. So now you'll probably want to have, if you had a medium block before, you'll have a tall block for the dorsal spine. And your head block will be as tall as it goes to support the head. Okay, so first just make sure you're in hero pose well, that you see the kneecaps as they should look, the toes as they should look, the heels outside the hips. We want to, again, try to land with the dorsal spine coming onto that first block. So I like to use my thumbs, and you may not get this far. So I went right back to my block, but if you're not going to land today, I want you just to kind of prop up on your hands and do your own supporting of moving the shoulder blades in toward the chest, of winding the arms and keeping the knees down. So we don't want to let the knees fly up off the floor. Okay, if you do reach the block, you're going to land there, and then the head will come down as well. If you do fully recline, that means you can free up the arms to extend overhead. So wherever you are, really refining all these wise actions we've talked about today. Sensing your back. What is the back telling you? Is something nagging at you? Can you find a little manipulation to ease the nagging. Because we always need to kind of seek out repose in the pose. We don't want to be stuck in the kind of busy work of nitpicking on the pose. So if you did get as far as raising the arms overhead, you'll start to move your hands back toward your feet. To come out safely, remember to use your stomach muscles, keep your breastbone really the forwardmost point of the front body, coming all the way up. And now you're gonna kind of remove whatever's underneath you. Don't worry about what's behind you. Sit forward in table. Cross the ankles, and then sit back and extend your legs in front of you. Bringing your hands maybe a little farther back to support Dandasana. Really, we're doing this for the legs, which just had deep knee flexion. So really ironing out the backs of the knees, reaching out through the heels and ball mounds. Keep your heels down. Sometimes you see people working so much with the knees, their heels fly off the floor. That's not the pose. So we're really trying to remove the gap behind the ankles and the knees. So you have to keep heels down. And then last but not least, we need to tuck in a twist before Shavasana. It's really essential to tie up a back bending practice with a good significant twist. So the nervous system is more regulated because back bendings are upregulating. So we're going to be doing Parivrtta Padangusthasana, which is the revolving Supta, I should say, Parivrtta Padangusthasana. So reclining, revolving, hand to big toe pose. So if you need a blanket for your head, make sure to put one where your head will be. We're going to do the version with the bent knee. So you shouldn't need any props. You can come onto your back. And start with your knees bent, and you can just hug the left leg. We're going to start with left because that's the way I'm facing you guys now. So I just want you to be able to see. So hug the left leg in, both hands, softening into the left hip joint and bringing the thigh as close as you can to the chest. And as you're doing so, you can extend the right leg. And now keep your right hand over your left shin. Some people prefer the back of the thigh. You're going to roll onto your right hip and carry that left leg to the right, stacking your hips. And you can either leave your left hand on your side, ribs, or waist, or extend the arm sideways and roll the head to look to the left. Just imagine that action of wringing out like a dish rag. Let your spine be that dish rag. Nice, juicy twist. Ease yourself back to center. Just start by stepping down with the left foot as you draw the right leg in with both hands. Softening into the right hip joint. Noticing the thigh closing in on the chest. And as you hold, feel free to extend the left leg. Left hand will continue holding the right leg. On an exhale, you're going to move that right leg to the left. You're going to roll onto your outer left hip, completely uprooting the right buttock. And again, draping the right hand over your side body or extending the arm and looking off to the right. At this point, you should be on the outer left foot. Left leg is perfectly straight. It's as if you're in a standing mountain pose with the left leg. And now gently carry yourself back to center, drawing both legs in with one hand on each shin or behind each thigh, under each thigh. Tilting the chin forward, taking one forward fold here in reclining child's pose before we put ourselves in Shavasana pose. Once you're ready, feel free to bring the feet down, extend the legs one by one. Unfold your arms. Take a moment to press your arms down and lift your chest up. So you place the shoulders with a little bit of the flesh rotating down, and the shoulder blades get a little bit more lifted into the chest. Put your palms in a receptive, upward facing position. And try to drag the heels away from the trunk so your legs are as long as they can be, and your feet flop open. Give up all effort in your legs. And really fully meeting the floor with all of your weight. Sometimes there's a layer of tension between our bodies and the floor. So just imagine you're merging with the floor. You're becoming one. Set the breath free. There's no restraints on the breath. You're just observing. Soften the center of the brow line. Soften your jaw, and even imagine the teeth softening into their gums. Observing the body breathing on its own. As if you're watching yourself from a distance. In this practice, if done well, it puts space between ourselves and our bodies, ourselves and our minds. So we don't identify with our mind, we don't identify with our body. We gain some distance, some perspective of having a body, of having a mind. Space comes into the body, space comes between thoughts, space comes between breaths, and now space comes between having a body, having a mind. We'll start to grow the breaths, but without inviting any strain, without disrupting the nervous system from its quiet state. Drawing in some deeper, slow, steady inhales, releasing the exhalation more thoroughly. And when you conclude the next deep exhalation, just kind of float back into the automatic, easy breathing. And once you're there, starting to wiggle your fingers and toes very slightly. Maybe then starting to play with rotating at the joints of the ankles, the wrists. From there, bending elbows and bending knees. And from there, shifting to your side. Take a few moments on your side. You might use your arm as a pillow to support your head. Your eyes might open here, but not really because you're trying to see anything. And then as you come up, try to do so by minimizing effort, just using what you need to bring yourself back to an upright seated position. Take a moment to sit tall, joining the hands together in front of the heart. And using the thumbs, the base of the thumbs, to scrub up on the breastbone. Extending the fingertips slightly away from your body. Let's take a deep breath in through the nose and let it go. From the place within me that I know to be divine, honor that place within each of you. Namaste. All right. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you soon. I hope. Beautiful day. Come Wednesday, come Friday. Those are the next two classes. Bye.